In 2016, I was a teacher. I wanted to change the world until I got the terrifying news and exciting news that I was going to be a father. Now, what should have been the best days of my life became a very worrying time for me, because at the 20-week scan of my baby, I was getting into that scan as an ignorant boy thinking, am I having a boy or a girl? And in that scan, we found out the devastating news that our baby would be born with a very severe condition called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Oh, and it's a boy. Now, hypoplastic left heart syndrome, I didn't have a clue at that time what it meant. I still don't really know fully what it means. What I do know is that it meant that my baby boy would be being born with half a working heart, which also means that he would be being born with one of the worst congenital heart defects that you could possibly be born with. Fast forward to October 2016, and Dahi McGowan was born. He was born, and instantly my whole world changed. I always say to people who are becoming parents for the first time, you will feel a love that you have never, ever felt before. And I was so grateful to have felt that. Now, I couldn't feel it for too long, because at 2 days old, we had to travel to London, and Dahi was to go through open heart surgery at just 4 days old. Now, we travelled to London on a private plane, and I got to hold my beautiful boy for the first time the night before his surgery. His surgery had gone really well. 8 hours of operating on the size of a walnut. Dahi had come back, and everything had gone well. Myself and his mother, we went back to the hotel, allowed ourselves to have dinner, a pint, and a clink, a sláinte, to celebrate until the next morning. 6 a.m., we got a call to say things aren't as they were. We went back to the hospital, and our baby boy, I can only describe him as the colour navy. His saturation levels were dipping dangerously low. And we were then told that he would need emergency surgery to be placed on an ECMO machine to try and give his body a break. He would be able to last 5 days maximum on this machine. Day 6 was Halloween, and it really was a total nightmare. Dahi was 1 day over the maximum he could be there. He hadn't opened his eyes. I hadn't actually seen his eyes open since holding him when he was 3 days old. He's now 10 days old. Nothing is working. Every time they turn this machine down, his numbers drop. There's around 30 people, consultants, nurses, specialists, arguing amongst each other. We're losing this boy. What can we do? And then in walks Professor David Anderson, the surgeon who had operated on him 6 days before. Silence fell. And at that moment, Professor David Anderson, he said to me, nothing we're doing is working for your boy. Everything we try for your boy, it's failing. Now, in this packed room, he gave us the option. We can try a surgery that I don't think will work. Or your boy, he's very peaceful. We can turn off the machine and he can pass away peacefully. Now, I know what decision we would have leaned towards, but for one moment, at that very moment, in that packed room, Dahi opened his eyes and looked directly at Professor David Anderson. And Professor David Anderson, he turned to us and he says, your boy wants to live. Now, that wouldn't increase Dahi's chances, but what it did, it made our minds up for us. We signed another consent form of risk of death, and away he went for more surgery. Now, Dahi came back from that surgery 8 hours later again, was off ECMO, but still had a very rocky road ahead of him. But we knew at that stage that we had such a fighter. Weeks passed, days passed, months passed, and Dahi was just getting that wee bit stronger. He came back to Belfast. We spent the Christmas in the hospital, which was a magical Christmas because we were close to family. A few months later, Dahi would go for more surgery. We met Professor David Anderson again. This time it wasn't as rocky. Then about 8 months passed, and we were living a beautiful, boring life, enjoying the beautiful boy who was a miracle at that stage. And then we found out when Dahi was 18 months that he had another problem with his heart and that he needed the gift of a heart transplant. Now, this was devastating news because we thought we had been over the worst. Dahi had already been a miracle once. He needs to be one again and again. So at that stage, I had a bit of a background in campaigning. I was working on Irish language campaigns, but in the background. I was translating press releases. I was setting up radio interviews. I was advising, but I was learning. But when you have a situation like mine, when you realize Dahi, the boy that made me have that feeling of that love for the first time, I decided to leave everything behind. My profession as a teacher, being a campaigner for the Irish language, and I decided that I was starting a campaign for organ donation awareness. Now, you just don't be placed on a transplant list overnight. From January till June, I spent months waiting to find out if Dahi was accepted onto the list. I planned, I read every report possible to me from NHS Blood and Transplant. I looked around the world at different campaigns, and I decided at that moment, if Dahi was accepted onto the list, then I would start a campaign for organ donation awareness. He was accepted onto the list on the 1st of June of 2018, and he has been waiting for the gift of a heart transplant ever since. But we started Donate for Dahi. And what I noticed right away was that people wanted to listen. So the first thing that I would say to any person who is thinking about building a campaign is to have your story. Every single person in this room today has a story in them. Every single person in this room is a storyteller in one way or another. And it's not just the people that are on this stage. And believe me, people want to listen to that story. I've also found that story and telling that story properly is a way of getting to the door. One way I've always found of getting into that room is about showing up. And I've heard it time and time again. And anyone who has been to leadership talks or anything will hear about just showing up. Now, if you do show up time and time again, which I did, it will get you into that room. But it will only get you into that room. It's how you show up as well. Believe me, I had many doors closed in my face, but I still showed up the next day until I was in the room. Then that was my opportunity. And that was my opportunity to do something to build relationships. And that boy who was 10 days old and opened his eyes, from that to then changing our laws around organ donation, having over 300,000 people join the organ donor register. How we got to that stage, I put down to the human connection, building those relationships with those politicians who told me that this can't be done making them want to run through a wall for you where they can't say no to you, even if it can't be done. And that was one of the biggest things, the biggest successes of our campaign. It was getting people to believe in that why, getting people to believe in Daithí, not wanting to let us down and Daithí down. And I believe that it wasn't on assembly floors that got Daithí's law passed. It was those kind of back alley conversations in the hall, building those relationships, getting to know people, and taking your chance. I wasn't going to share this story, but there was one time when I was at a garden party in Hillsborough Gardens, and it was King Charles's first visit to Hillsborough as the king. And Chris Heaton Harris was the Secretary of State at the time. And we were trying to get his attention because he was our last hope. And I was introduced to King Charles. And I could have done the normal stuff. Shook his hand, told him it was a pleasure to meet him, and this and that and the other. But I decided beforehand I was going to take my chance. And instead of doing all the formalities, I told him instantly about Daithí's law, the delay, told him about Daithí's journey. And he said to me, it's absolutely preposterous. He says, what is the delay? And Chris Heaton Harris was standing beside him, and I says, he is. And although the king had no power, the look on Chris Heaton Harris's face to say, you've got me there. And that is just one example of taking the opportunity. Now, the theme of today is beyond the obstacle. The biggest obstacle is still ahead of us. That boy who had less than 10% chance at birth is 10 years old in October. And I do believe that there is a part 2 to this talk, because when we do overcome that obstacle, it's a day that I can't wait to see, the day that Daithí gets the gift of a heart transplant. And I want to end by saying this. I don't know if anybody will take anything from this talk today, but what I'm sure you will take from this talk today is that I am one of the proudest daddies in the whole world. And that's, that I'll stand over that all day long. Because when Daithí opened his eyes, at that very moment, he didn't just save his own life. He absolutely saved my life, and he gave me. Daithí is waiting on the gift of life, but what he did that day and what he has done on this journey is give me the gift of what life is all about, the value of life. So thank you.